Porn addiction is a very serious problem, and even though it's a serious problem, it's not talked about nearly enough. This video doesn't intend to explain why porn is bad. We all know it is. We don't need any research, we don't need any evidence to show us that this stuff isn't good for us. We know it messes with our brains. And the unfortunate part about all of this is that the serious problem, this thing that's really bad for us, is only going to become a bigger and bigger problem. We already are seeing how this adult content, this very sexual, explicit content, is affecting us, is affecting the young men growing up in this generation. We see how it can make you a very weak, dangerous man.
Well, I was actually coming out here to pick up a cupcake.
When you are full of lust and you don't control yourself, it destroys your mental health. It puts you in a very, very, very dark place. And we're seeing the consequences of it when these very dependent and addicted men do very, very scary things.
It's important to me, and that people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography and not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things. And I take full responsibility. Once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point.
Looking into the future, we can obviously see how this problem is going to just get worse and worse. Technology is only going to get better, our world is only going to get more digitalized, and every young man who has access to the internet is going to be able to find very explicit sexual content very easily. There's not much in the way to protect a young man, a young boy, from finding this very, very sexual content. And honestly, we don't really know how bad this stuff really is for a young mind, because we're not able to test it, to experiment it. But I think as this problem gets worse and worse, we're going to be able to see how it really does affect a young boy who is growing up into being a young man. The content itself is only going to get more stimulating. Guys are going to start seeing this at a very, very young age. It's going to start being advertised, this sexual content. I mean, even now, you see in these mobile games and these ads on children websites and games, they're being advertised explicit sexual content. The future young men of this world are going to get hooked on porn at a very, very young age. And the problem is, we are doing barely anything to inform young men about this. Porn addiction is a real addiction. It is something that I think is kind of dismissed by the general public, by society. It's seen as something that isn't really that bad. But for some reason, when very, very young boys, literally 8, 9, 10-year-olds are watching this stuff that we know they should not be watching, we just decide to not talk about it. Porn addiction is seen as something that's not very serious, something that doesn't really need attention, and society and the general public doesn't really talk about this stuff, even though it is the most prevalent addiction amongst young men. It is like a silent battle that we have to go through, because we find it, we've never been informed about it, no one's ever talked to us really about it before. Our parents never warned us, other than oh, don't go on any weird websites. School never warned us. Society never warned us. So it's our secret. And we're not really able to talk about it with anybody. And so that's why it turns into addiction for most young men who find this. Adult content is the actual most dangerous thing that a young man can find on the internet. It's not what parents usually warn their kids about. It's not, oh, don't put your name on any websites, don't type your name when you're playing video games. But the real thing that we should be warned about is all this stimulating content that can easily turn into addiction. And school doesn't talk about this either. I guess it's just too taboo of a topic for school to take seriously. Even though there are so many young men silently suffering, it's like this is the only addiction out there that is never talked about outside of an online community, outside of NoFap, outside of semen retention. It is never even mentioned once in school, by most parents, it's not talked about. And I think over time, this problem will become so prevalent that it literally cannot be ignored anymore. And even though NoFap is great, it's one of the greatest parts of self-improvement, it can't reach everybody. It can't reach every guy out there. And this problem is going to get bigger and bigger. And at some point, something will have to be done about it. Parents will have to start talking about it. Schools will have to start talking about it. Because it's something that shouldn't be ignored, but it will be ignored until it cannot be any longer. The porn industry and the cigarette industry are actually very, very similar. And so are the addictions themselves. Smoking cigarettes is obviously very addictive, and so is watching porn. If you look back in time, cigarettes used to be considered something that was healthy, something that wasn't bad for you at all. And the general public believed that there was absolutely nothing wrong with smoking, because it was advertised in a way that made it seem healthy.
What cigarette do you smoke, Doctor? Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
In these commercials, they would have doctors recommending their best cigarette. Like, oh, this is the cigarette that I would recommend you smoke. And it implies that all of this is actually beneficial, that not only is it not bad for you, it's actually good for you and recommended by medical professionals. And when we look at how society views pornography, it's eerily similar to how smoking cigarettes used to be viewed as something that was actually good for you. A lot of the time, watching this content is made out to be something that is actually healthy, something that's normal. But the truth is, even though it's normal to have sexual desires, it's not normal to fulfill them through a screen. It is not normal. We shouldn't be seeing this amount of sexual interaction from a very young age. It literally should not be possible. But of course, even though there are studies showing that it isn't good for your mental health, even though there are so many videos that go deep into how watching pornography is really, really bad for you, how it destroys your dopamine levels, how it ruins your dopamine circuitry.
It's a very potent stimulus, and very potent stimuli of any kind set a threshold for dopamine release. Higher the dopamine peak, the bigger the drop afterwards.
It's made out to seem by society that this is just a normal thing, and they don't talk about how it's an addiction. And because of that, most guys don't know that what they're doing is actually extremely bad for them and extremely bad for their mind. But what happened to the cigarette industry? Well, it was exposed.
There's a very strong relationship, and probably a causal relationship, between heart disease and cigarette smoking.
Because over time, the amount of people who had been getting sick, who had been getting lung cancer, who had been getting diseases, these avid smokers who smoked every single day, these people who thought it was completely healthy, who should have been, by that standard, completely healthy people because, right, smoking's healthy, they were starting to get sick and die. And so, eventually, evidence comes out, research comes out, that this stuff is terrible for you. It's addicting, it causes disease, it causes cancer. It will absolutely destroy you if you get addicted to it. And we're kind of in that middle stage right now where in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we are going to start seeing what adult content actually does to a young person's mind when they grow up, as they keep watching this explicit content all throughout their teenage years and as they grow up. And this problem is going to get very bad. There's going to be a rise in men who stay inside and men who don't exercise and men who are just weak in general. It's going to get very extreme. Men's mental health is going to be absolutely destroyed by this growing industry. This industry that just keeps getting bigger. At a certain point, there are going to be so many weak men, so many men that can barely even function, that people will have to start paying attention to it. They will have to start caring. Porn addiction is going to ruin the next generations of young men, the next generations of men that come after us. Because as our world gets more separated, as men get more isolated and lonely, as this content becomes more and more stimulating, the men of this world will start to be greatly affected by it. And even though so many guys are suffering in silence, nobody talks about this. nobody really cares except in this online community of self-improvement. And the only thing that we can really do is bring more attention to this subject. Because if no one is going to talk about it, if society's not going to talk about it, if school's not going to talk about it, then we have to. It's a very, very real addiction that pretty much all young men are going through. If you're a guy that's similar to my age, probably most of your friends, most of the guys in your school similar to your age, have been seeing this content, who are either addicted or are going to be addicted. And the best thing that we can do is try to talk about this more, try to help each other out. And I think one of the greatest ways to do that is through this online community, even though it can't reach everybody. More guys need to know about NoFap. More guys need to know about self-improvement. And even though it's a kind of taboo, sensitive topic to talk about, we need to talk about it because it seems like nobody else will.